Hi, I'm Kristal Hart, and we are at the National Portrait Museum in Washington, D.C., where the United States Postal Service hosts the first day of issue ceremony for a new forever stamp commemorating the legacy of the late Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Ginsburg was known for her groundbreaking contributions to justice, gender equality, and the rule of law.
Delighted about the stamp.
And do you like the portrait that they picked?
It's beautiful, and the artists who are responsible for this stamp, I think, did a wonderful job, and she would be very honored, and the whole family is really happy about it.
I just can't believe it. It's just so well. When I took a photograph, I never ever would have dreamed it would end up as stamping. It was just remarkable. I collected stamps when I was a kid, and to think my photograph would be on a stamp eventually was just amazing. But when I photographed in the chambers, and it was like I was just having this thing where I didn't quite like the angle of her head. So I got down on the floor and I looked up at her, and you see the power that it gives in that photograph like that. It's amazing. You look right into her soul. It's just amazing. I was so fortunate with that shot. It was a great session. Thanks.
About what year was that photo taken?
This was 2017. And we did it in our chambers, yeah.
In her chambers?
Yeah.
Did you like how it all came out?
I'm really thrilled, yeah. It's amazing. When somebody said it was going to make it a stamp, I kind of didn't really hit me, but it hit me tonight.
Were there a lot of other photographs that you took of her?
I took probably about 100 altogether. And I did several of them around this. She was standing in front of a desk, and then I did some around there's quite a, the fact is, it was a real live chambers. She showed me her collars and all that. So I took various things. I took her. She had a statue of her and her husband. He was in a cook's outfit, and she was in the robes, and I took her with that as well. But this was just way beyond the best one. It was just felt great when you look at it. You look at it and you feel engaged.
Well, it's wonderful that Justice Ginsburg is commemorated in this way. She meant so much to the people who knew her, and even more to the people who didn't. And she changed the way the world is for them.
And being a broadcaster yourself, what was she like to work with?
Well, our relationship, I knew her first before either of us had any significant repute. She was in her 30s, I was in my 20s, so I knew her for almost 50 years, and she was my friend and also the subject of my reporting, and we knew where the boundaries were.
Now, to the business at hand. This is the moment you have been waiting for this evening, the dedication of the Ruth Bader Ginsburg Commemorative Forever Stamp. To do the honors tonight, we have Roman Martinez, the chairman of the Postal Service Board of Governors, which is comparable to the board of directors of a corporation. They direct the organization's expenditures, the long-range planning and policies, and as you can imagine, it is an enormous task. Governor Martinez also chairs the board's audit and finance committees. He serves on the election mail committee as well, and it is our honor tonight to present the Honorable Roman Martinez.
Good evening. I'm glad he got that right. Some people call me the horrible Roman Martinez, but that's another story. Good evening. What an honor to be here tonight, representing over 630,000 women and men of the Postal Service. First of all, I'd like to thank the National Portrait Gallery for providing this magnificent space for such a great event. Thank you. And I also want to thank the postal workers who put up these events year-round, and they do a great job. They bring it to life. You guys are terrific. One of the privileges of being chairman of the board, perhaps the only one, is that I get first pick for the first day of issue events like this. And this one was very special to me. One, we're honoring a great American and a great individual, but we're also in effect honoring the Supreme Court, which I hold in high esteem. It plays a very important role upholding the Constitution and the rule of law. I'm the only speaker tonight who probably does not know, or who did not know, Justice Ginsburg, but I saw her in action many times at the court. I was always impressed by her quiet but firm demeanor, her sharp questions, and I saw her in action many times during the last several years. Beyond the court, her personality, spirit, and presence are widely held by many Americans. A lot has been said about her, but to me, the one particular thing that I admire was her ability to persevere, her ability to fight for what she believed in, but to do it so in a civil way. As she said, you can disagree without being disagreeable. And her famous friendship with Justice Scalia, another great American, is a testament to that principle. In a time of sharp divisions in our country, we need more of that Ginsburg spirit. And as we Americans use her forever stamp, let us hope forever remember what binds us together as a nation.
Our next speaker is so well known in this town that, as they say, she needs no introduction, but yet she is going to get one anyway. She is the National Public Radio Legal Affairs correspondent whose coverage of the Supreme Court and legal affairs have won widespread recognition, including, and this is a long list, the George Peabody Award, the Broadcaster of the Year, the Saul Tayshoff Award for Excellence in Broadcasting for the National Press Foundation. She has been honored 7 times by the American Bar Association for her continued excellence in legal reporting, and she is the recipient of more than 24 honorary degrees. She is also the author of the New York Times bestseller, Dinners with Ruth, a memoir of power and friendships. Of course, I could be talking about nobody else in this town but the legendary Nina Totenberg.
Legendary means old. It's really wonderful to be here today. It's fitting that we are assembled to celebrate Ruth Bader Ginsburg and her stamp, because RBG quite simply changed the way the world is for American women. And she did that even before she became a judge. For more than a decade, until her first judicial appointment, she led the fight in the courts for gender equality. When she began her legal crusade, women were treated, I know this is hard to believe for many in this audience, women at that time were treated by law differently from men. Hundreds of state and federal laws restricted what women could do, barring them from all manner of jobs, rights, even jury service. But by the time she became a judge in 1980, she had quite literally wrought a revolution. The strategy that she devised as an advocate was characteristically cautious, precise, and single-mindedly aimed at one goal: winning. Knowing that she had to persuade male establishment-oriented judges, she often picked male plaintiffs to illustrate how discrimination against women can also harm men. In one of her earlier cases, she represented a man whose wife, the principal breadwinner, died in childbirth. The husband sought survivor's benefits to care for his child. But under the then existing Social Security law, only widows, not widowers, were entitled to collect survivor's benefits. And so she told the justices that this law, and I can almost hear her voice in my head, quote, operates to the disadvantage of female workers, their surviving spouses, and their children. The court would ultimately agree. She won a lot of victories as a justice, too. She was a master at holding a close majority together. But as the court grew more and more conservative, her dissents grew more and more pungent. My personal favorite came in 2013, when the court struck down a key provision of the Voting Rights Act, contending that times had changed and the law was no longer needed. Justice Ginsburg, in dissent, said that throwing out the law because it was working was like throwing away your umbrella in a rainstorm because you're not getting wet. She was an unlikely pioneer, a diminutive and shy woman whose soft voice belied a spine of steel. And by the time she was in her late 80s, she was, to her astonishment, and I would have to say, and her pleasure, something of a rock star to women and men of all ages. She was the subject of 2 movies, merchandise galore featuring her notorious RBG moniker, a Time magazine cover, and regular Saturday Night Live sketches that invariably ended with Kate McKinnon, the Ginsburg imitator, declaring, "And that's a Ginsburg." Over her 87 years, she was a friend to hundreds and hundreds of people from all walks of life. The Supreme Court IT guy charged with teaching her how to use a computer found that from time to time the justice, who knew he was an opera fan, would invite him to go to a performance with her. Or there was the law clerk, who had no idea that the justice knew of his trouble finding a daycare spot for his toddler, until the day he accompanied her to a speech at Georgetown University. And afterwards, in the elevator, RBG asked her escorts, "Where is the daycare center?" The answer was the basement, where RBG promptly led the whole entourage, announcing when she got there, "Hello, I'm Justice Ginsburg. My clerk Joe is looking for a daycare spot for his son Simon. We'd like a tour." Problem solved. I could never get over how much emotional peripheral vision Ruth had. She always seemed to know when to write, when to call, and her actions were so often above and beyond the call of duty. When cancer reared its ugly head again in 2018, she leaned on my surgeon husband, David, for advice, but I remained in the dark. On the day of the surgery, just hours after she was wheeled out of the OR, she called me from the ICU. She was calling, she said, because she wanted me to know why she had forbidden David to tell me anything about what was going on. "I didn't want you to be trapped between your friendship for me and your obligations as a journalist," she said. The reach of her personal decency extended to all manner of folks, important and unimportant. For decades, she corresponded with Lois Severin after the death of Severin's husband, who had been a friend of the Ginsburgs at Cornell. After the initial condolence note, RBG would periodically send cards and chatty notes, often accompanied by a speech she'd given or an article of interest. And Lois? Well, Lois began sending crocheted lacy gloves to Ruth, gloves that, along with similar ones that she bought at Bergdorf's, would be worn by the justice to hide the dark bruise marks on her hands from cancer treatments. Over the years, I interviewed the justice dozens and dozens of times, and in one of our last, she remained optimistic even though she was, again, fighting cancer. "I do think I was born under a very bright star," she said with a smile. "Because if you think about it, if you think about my life, I get out of law school. I have top grades. No law firm in the city of New York will hire me. I end up teaching, and it gave me time to devote to the movement for evening out the rights of women and men." It was that legal crusade, of course, that led to her appointment to the United States Supreme Court and to this forever postage stamp this evening. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Nina. That was fantastic. Nina Totenberg, everyone. We are pleased to introduce this evening our next speaker who comes to from the Postal Service. Lori Dim is an executive in their law department, and her practice has included employment, government contracts, real estate law. However, she knew Justice Ginsburg through the world of opera. Everyone, please give a big welcome tonight to Lori Dim.
I am thrilled to participate in this celebration because of my long-standing connection with Justice Ginsburg as a fellow opera lover. I first met her many years ago through another opera fan. We were at a movie theater to watch the Saturday matinee performance of the New York Metropolitan Opera, which was being transmitted live via satellite. It soon became a regular occurrence, and we saw quite a few of them over the years. As you might imagine, it was quite an experience attending these performances with Justice Ginsburg. At times, there was a standing ovation when she entered the auditorium, and a crowd of admirers that could easily overwhelm her if they were left unchecked by security. Justice Ginsburg would gently wave her arms to motion everyone to sit down, but it could take a minute or two before people could calm down. And people think Taylor Swift is a rock star. I quickly discovered that it was best not to leave my seat during intermission because there was always a line of starstruck fans. Someone would invariably try to take my seat to get her attention, and sometimes they didn't want to leave. Another thing I discovered was that I no longer needed to bring my opera reference book. There was no reason, since she knew so much about opera and was so generous in sharing her knowledge. She would comment on the singers, both past and present, and she'd tell stories about her visits to the Opera House as a child, and how she and her husband Martin went to the Metropolitan Opera when they were dating. Not surprisingly, a frequent topic of conversation was the Washington National Opera at the Kennedy Center, which she adored. She attended their dress rehearsals, and she liked to discuss the performances. Her knowledge of opera was remarkable, and it was fascinating to listen to her candid opinions of the productions. She was, just as you would imagine, incredibly well-informed, engaging, thoughtful, and respectful. She was a lovely person, a truly great lady. It's because of our opera connection over the years that I am sure Justice Ginsburg would enjoy the next portion of the program this evening. It is my pleasure to present Victory Brinker, the classical singing sensation who at the age of 7 was named the Guinness World Record's youngest opera singer. She's the winner of numerous contests and prizes and is known for her breakthrough performance on America's Got Talent. Please welcome Victory Brinker.
We have reached the grand finale this evening, and it is a special one. Our final speaker this evening is Clara Sparrow. She is a lawyer. She practices trial and appellate litigation. She focuses her pro bono practice on reproductive rights litigation and advising family law and criminal defense. She is a lecturer at the Harvard Law School, and she just happens to be the granddaughter of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. We are delighted this evening to present to you Clara Sparrow.
On behalf of the family of my grandmother, my bubby, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, thank you to the United States Postal Service for this great honor. Both during her life and after her death, my grandmother has been honored with several inspiring and wonderful awards and recognitions. But this one is particularly special because I think it is the first that she shares with Yogi Berra. I'd like to thank those who made today possible, including the Honorable Roman Martinez, Kim Sayat, my grandmother's dear colleague and friend, Chief Justice Roberts, and the two artists responsible for the image that will soon be making its way across the country, Michael Dees, who crafted the portrait based on a photograph by Philip Birmingham. Of the many honors my grandmother has received, this stamp is especially fitting, and not only because the Supreme Court has had occasion to interpret the postal clause found in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. Indeed, stamps played a large role in my grandmother's life from long before she ever sat on a federal bench. By all accounts, Bubby was an exacting parent who set high academic expectations for her children, as she would later of her clerks and her grandchildren. She was involved in her children's education, wanting to go beyond the already demanding curricula at her children's schools. So, in the 1960s, Bubby used an extensive stamp collection borrowed from her cousin and closest friend, Richard, to teach my mother geography and history. My mother learned about the European colonization of Africa by examining stamps like those from French Togoland, which by the time my mother was in middle school had gained independence from France, and she knew only as Togo. My mother learned about the brief independence of nations like Estonia and Latvia, which she knew only as part of the USSR. Bubby was also a regular user of stamps. She had a penchant for sending handwritten snail mail letters. I always looked forward to receiving her birthday cards in the mail. My favorite from my 4th birthday, which featured a drawing of Bubby and Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, surrounded by music notes and the lyrics to the happy birthday song. Inside the card, it simply said, "From the Supremes." I have saved all of her cards and the envelopes in which they were sent. Leafing through those envelopes, I discovered stamps of all kinds, including my favorite, a Bugs Bunny stamp from 1997, which, by the way, cost only 32 cents. And Bubby wrote letters her whole life. After her death, I came across a box of letters that Bubby wrote to her soon-to-be mother-in-law during her final year of college at Cornell. The letters provide a fascinating and moving glimpse into a young woman in love and excited to be married and ready to be done with college. Each of the letters I found, which span an entire academic year, bore a 3-cent stamp featuring a profile of the man who drafted the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson. I am sure that Bubby would be thrilled beyond words to learn that she will be joining the ranks of founding fathers and others who inspired her, like Susan B. Anthony, Alice Paul, and Ella Baker, not to mention opera legends Lily Pons and Richard Tucker, all of whom were similarly honored by the United States Postal Service with stamps. Her legacy, like theirs, will forever be stamped into the story of this great nation. Thank you.
And I'm Kristal Hart reporting from the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C. Hope you've enjoyed the show. Thanks for watching, and mail a letter today.